Hello, and welcome to Reading the Rules for Competitors, Mentors, Coaches, and ES. My name is Karen Emmons, and I am a National Event Supervisor and Rule Writer. This video is a general introduction to reading the Science Olympiad rules. We're going to look at each section of the rules, looking at the language, seeking to understand how it all fits together, and looking at what things are not obvious. We will not, however, be discussing any specific events rules. Now, before you even dive into the rules for a specific event, there are 4 things to know before you do that. So let's start there. First, make sure you have the correct year's rules. Don't Google for the rules. Science Olympiad rules are not allowed to be posted online. If you find something with the same name, it is probably an old year's rules and not applicable for the current year. The rules are a free download from the national website, so just go there to get them. However, if you are presented with a document of rules, how do you know whether they're the old rules or new rules? Well, you look at the bottom of the rule page and you'll find an icon that looks like what I've got here on the slide. And that represents the tournament year, division, and page number. So in this specific example I have here, it's tournament year 2023, division B, page number 7. And note, for the school year 2024-25, for example, the tournament year should be 2025. The tournament year is always represented as the later half of the year where the national tournament is happening. So that's true even if you're attending a fall 2024 tournament. So make sure also you're thinking about what year of tournament you're actually participating in. Now, why is some of the information bolded in the rules? It's not for emphasis like many people think. Instead, it's to indicate changes from the previous time the event was run. So it's intended to be just a quick glance at what is new. And it's most useful the second year an event is in the rotation. Now, it isn't perfect. It's hard to proofread that for the event writers at Nationals, and some things that are changed may accidentally not be bolded. But also, you can't bold something that was deleted. So it's not a substitute for reading the rules carefully, but it can be a very useful glimpse. The third thing to know is that there are actually rules before the rules. Those are called the general rules. They're right up front in the rule book, even before the event rules. And these are the rules that apply to all the tournaments in all the events. There's rules on electronics usage, practicing at the tournament venue, who can pound, all kinds of things. And while they're generally the same each year, they are sometimes updated or a new one is added. And in fact, there is a new one that was added for 2025. So it's important to keep an eye on them and read them and know what they are. In particular, though, I'm going to highlight one specific rule, General Rule number 1, because that one's the most often cited by nationals and by event supervisors when they're asked whether a specific thing is allowed in an event. General Rule 1 says, actions and items are permitted unless they are explicitly excluded in the rules, are unsafe, or violate the spirit of the problem. Now, I'm going to talk about the spirit of the problem in a minute, but this is a good rule to know as you're looking at the breadth of what you can do in an event. The final 4th thing you need to know before even starting to dive into the event rules is that there are rule corrections and clarifications. Rules can have errors or need clarifying, and Nationals publishes rule corrections and rule clarifications on their soinc.org website. Those are considered 2 separate things. They're in 2 places on their website. Now, many states also publish their own rule clarifications. And these state clarifications are generally in line with the national ones, but they can be in opposition as well. So it's imperative to know the policy of where you're competing. If you're competing in Virginia, where I am writing this today, VASO publishes and uses only their own clarifications in their regional and state tournaments. But do remember that rule corrections and clarifications, whichever ones are being used in a tournament, are as binding as rules, and you're expected to see them and observe them. All right, so getting that part out of the way, let's go ahead and now start to look at the rules themselves. At the top of every rule page is section 1. And there's a lot packed in that little bit of wording. So we're going to pick that apart. The first thing in that is the description. Don't overlook that. The description of the rule is actually, it's a rule itself and can have a required piece of information in it. So you need to be paying attention to that. And it defines the spirit of the problem, tells us what the event is about, and competitors are expected to make an honest effort in the event. You'll see in this particular example, which I think I pulled from Air Trajectory, it talks about designing, constructing, and calibrating a single device. So there's a bit of information that says you can only bring one device. Approx time is usually listed up at the top of the rules, and that's about how long the participants will be engaged in the event. Written tests will usually say 50 minutes, and that is essentially reflecting the entire competition session, because sessions at tournaments usually last from 50 to 60 minutes. But the build events don't usually take the entire session for teams, so you'll see maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes, however long it's expected. But the team may still need to be present for much of the competition session while they wait for their turn to actually show off their device. A team of up to. Now that represents how many students from a single team can compete. It's almost always 2, occasionally it's 3. But it's a partnership. The students are not competing against each other. They're working on one test or one device. Most of the events say up to, which means that you can send fewer than that number. But some of them say a team of, which means that you must send exactly that number of students. One example is write it, do it, which you need a writer and a doer. You can't do it with only one person. Also in section 1 is eye protection. Eye protection is a critical thing to know in an event. And there's additional information on the types in the rule book. The event rules will specify a type A, B, or C. It can also say none, or it cannot be listed. If it's not listed, that implies none. And if there is a type listed, it's required that everyone in the competition space, so that's competitors, the ES, and the volunteers, wear the proper goggles. And do know the competitors bring their own goggles. That's not something that the ES provides. The ABC system is a shorthand that National uses that represents what they want from the goggles and represents the safety rating. Type A, which you don't see in very many events, is a basic Z87 goggle. Now, you could also use a higher rating of Z87.1 or Z87 plus in an A event. Type B is for high impact events, where maybe things are flinging through the air or tower, and that requires Z87 plus. The plus is mandatory. It can be safety glasses too, but again, the Z87 plus has to be embossed on the goggles. And then type C is a splash protection, which is any Z87 or better with indirect vents. And that means that's to keep any kind of liquids from splashing into the eyes. So not the little pinhole venting that you can see in goggles, but an indirect venting. The goggles that I have pictured on this page, for example, have indirect venting. So you'll note that a type B goggle with a Z87 plus that has indirect vents will cover every event. And remember that the rating has to be embossed on the goggles. You can't just bring it in and say, I know they're safety glasses, even if it doesn't say it. The event supervisor should be checking. Impound. Impound can be yes or no or non-existent. Again, if it's not there, it implies no. Impound means that some items are dropped off before the competition begins, usually the first thing in the morning, and that stays with the event supervisor untouched by the team until the team competes. The list of what needs to be impounded, if applicable, is in Section 2 of the event rules. And you'll look at the tournament schedule for the time and location of impound. That varies. And only team members can drop items off at impound, so not parents, mentors, or coaches. That is one of the general rules. And pro tip, bring a pen or a pencil to impound because you'll be filling out a score sheet. Final thing in Section 1 is the calculator. Again, for calculator, there's also info on the types in the back of the rule book. And the event rules will specify class 1, 2, 3, or 4. It can also say none. Now, calculators are optional. They don't have to be used. You'll look at Section 2 of the event rules, though, to see how many calculators can be brought, because it might be one per team, it might be one per participant, so you just need to check to see. Now, unlike the goggles, where the goggle rating was the least that you had to bring in, the calculator rating or the calculator class is the highest class allowed in the event. So you can also use a lower class calculator if you want to in an event. All right, that was a lot of information for Section 1. In Section 2, you have what they call the event parameters. And that says what teams must bring, and that's usually additional safety equipment. It's important to note where the word must is used. It's used very intentionally. It's not optional equipment. It must be brought in. It says what teams may bring and in what form. Often some form of a cheat sheet or a notebook of resources. It states what items need to be impounded, if that's applicable. It says what the event supervisor will provide, and sometimes it may say what teams cannot bring. You have to be a little bit thoughtful about those disallowed items, though. It can never be a complete list. For example, if you're allowed a one-page double-sided cheat sheet, that's what you get for the resources. And even though it may say, that may not say you can't bring an encyclopedia and you can't bring a this and that, it's told you what the allowed resource is. You can't expand beyond it. So the disallowed items, when you see them, are generally things that a team might think that they could bring, that the event writer is trying to be clear are disallowed. After sections 1 and 2, the rules vary by type of event. So I'm going to cover those by section heading, but realize that the headings can have different numbers, they may be in different order, and they may not even be present in some events. One section that every event rules has, though, is called the competition. It just varies based on the type of event. So in a written or a lab event, the competition outlines the test topics, and in some cases, the format for the test or the lab. So look carefully at the topic levels. Some topics are only for state level or national level tournaments. And if you're going to an invitational, invitationals will choose and should announce a tournament topic level. The format, you can have written tests, you can have stations, you can have labs. You won't know ahead of time unless only one format is specified in the rules. The competition for build events is a little bit different. Now, an event with a build can also have a written test, in which case that previous slide applies. Those are called hybrid events, and they usually have the competition divided into a part 1, the written test, and a part 2, the device. So for the build part, in other words, in straight build events, or the part 2 of a hybrid, the rules will tell competitors what to expect during the competition. So things like how much time they have to show off their device, how many tries they get, what adjustments they can make, what they're not allowed to do. So it's an important important bit of information to know how you're going to be displaying your device. And scoring penalties can apply for violations of these rules. The construction parameters in a building event is one of the most important sections in the rules. It is the specs. It tells what to build and what parameters must be met. The failure to meet these rules will result in substantial penalties for the device in competition. So it's really important to read these rules frequently throughout the season. So not just once, but many times, because every time you read them, you'll find new nuances and things you didn't quite remember correctly. The design log, or the practice log, is another section you would see in an event with a build. Now, the design log can be a factor in the event score. And if it is, note carefully what elements are required to get the log score. How many trials are required? What variables? Does it need to have a diagram of the device? In impound events, the log will need to be impounded to get the points. So that means when you take your device in the morning, you have to take and leave a copy of the log as well. Logs may need to be kept for grading later, so don't submit your only copy of the log. And then a pro tip, please make sure that your team number is correct and all the information on the cover sheet, your team name, the student names. Submit a clean paper copy of the log. As someone who has graded a lot of logs that have gone through many tournaments and have all kinds of scribbles on them and don't have the correct information, I can tell you, you don't get top points when you submit a log that looks like that. Now, for many of the events, the log or the design log, the practice log, is optional in terms of the scoring, but they're highly recommended because they can help you set up your device. So for example, if you've done a lot of calibrating with your device and you know that the target is 6 meters out, and you know in your notes or in your log, you have the information about how many wheel turns you have to do or how to set the brake so that it stops at that 6 meters, you're going to want to be able to have access to your log information when you're actually running your device. So if it's an impound event, even if the log doesn't score, you will still need to impound the optional log to be able to use it. And some events even suggest impounding blank paper in the log if you feel like you might be needing to do some calculations as part of your process of showing your device. The competition area. You usually see some version of this in a build event. It can also be called the track or the test apparatus, depending on the event, and it describes the setting under which the device will be tested. What does the track look like? What test apparatus is the ES using? What does an optics box look like? What does a wind power test stand look like? That kind of information. Teams don't bring these items. This information is given for teams to be able to practice under similar conditions. Now, if they can, you don't have to practice under those exact conditions if it's not possible. But if testing equipment is described, it's important to realize that team members don't have to make it, right? Team members have to make only the device that they're showing off, that they're bringing to show to the tournament. Test equipment or practice equipment can be made by mentors, parents, teachers, friends. So all of that is useful to know as you move forward. The final section in all of the rules is scoring. And it states whether a low score or a high score wins. Usually high score wins, but there are exceptions, like the vehicle events. A lot of times there's a scoring formula, and you should review that carefully to see how to prioritize your time. In those hybrid events I was talking about, you might see how many points are for the written test and how many points are for the device to know whether to spend more time studying the topics or working on the device. If there are multiple score components like runtime and accuracy, which one of those contributes more to the event score? Do you need to spend more time making your device fast or accurate? Then also it shows in the scoring section how ties are broken, because there's no ties in SO. The event supervisors are asked to break all the ties. Now, this information is more important for the event supervisor. Competitors can't really prepare that much for that ahead of time, but it's there and you can see how event supervisors will be breaking any ties that happen. Also in the scoring section are the penalties, a harder topic to talk about. So a lot of penalties are done as point penalties, and they can be assigned based on several factors. The first and the most common are construction or competition violations. And that's given for violations to those various sections of the rules. So if you violate something in the construction section, it's a construction penalty. In the competition, it's a competition violation. Now, it can be a single penalty. So like if you've had one construction violation or three, it might still be the same points off. Or it could be a debit based on each violation. So it could be X number of points per construction violation. And you'll see that described in the rules, how that's applied. There can be point penalties for not managing to not impounding your device. In the chemistry events, you'll see cleanup penalties or penalties for bringing prohibited chemistry equipment. So again, if you take a look at the rules, you'll see what the point penalties are. A final penalty word you might see in that section is the word tier. Now, if it is an event that has tiers as penalties, all the teams that participate are placed in a tier. So placed in tier 1, tier 2, etc., based on whether or not they have violated any of the rules. Tier 1 is the best tier. That's the clean tier, where there are no penalties or no violations. Now, what happens with tiers is that all the teams in Tier 1 will score higher than those in Tier 2, even if the Tier 2 devices perform better. So you can see the importance of being in Tier 1. Tiers are typically for construction violations or for not impounding. But it's really important to realize that sometimes the word tier is not present, but the rules for that event really indicate that there is a tier based on their wording that they use in the penalties. And the most common example of that would be wording that says, teams without construction violations will be scored below all teams. Excuse me, let me try that again. Teams with construction violations will be scored below all teams without construction violations. So that's the exact description of a tier, but it doesn't use the word tier. So just doing a search in the rules for the word tier won't be enough. You'll want to read through the penalties to see exactly how they're applied. That's all I have today for reading the rules. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe if this was helpful to you. There are other resources that are available on the VASO website event pages, and be sure to check out all our other social media. Best of luck at tournament.